Could the Supreme Court actually overturn gay marriage rights next year? Honestly, yeah, they could. But the way the media is reporting on it right now does not tell the entire story, or why that's highly unlikely to happen at this time. The case the court is being asked to review is not primarily about gay marriage, but rather religious freedom. It's centered on whether a government official can refuse to issue a marriage license to a gay couple if that conflicts with the official's religious beliefs. That said, the people bringing the case are very openly telling the court, hey, while you're at it, why not just overturn gay marriage rights altogether? But I don't think that that's actually going to happen, at least not yet. This video will be broken down into three main parts. First, why I don't think the court will hear the case. Second, why I believe the court could overturn Obergefell, the case that enshrined gay marriage rights, if the right case came to him. And third, how Congress has moved to enshrine gay marriage rights. Well, sort of. We'll get to that part later. So first up, why I don't think they'll take the case. The case was brought by Kim Davis. You may not remember her name, I certainly didn't, but you may remember her story. She was a Kentucky county clerk who was jailed and fined for refusing to issue marriage licenses to get same-sex couples. She now argues that her punishment violated the First Amendment's free exercise clause. But there are two reasons that I don't see the court taking this case. First, because Obergefell is not the central issue in this case. And second, and this is really the larger reason, is that same-sex marriage is largely seen, at least politically, as settled law. And Chief Justice Roberts has no interest in changing what is considered settled law, especially in a case where the central issue is not gay marriage. Now, you may be sitting there and say, well, wasn't Roe v. Wade settled law? And the answer to that is no, it wasn't. Longevity does not make a law settled. The lack of ongoing national debate does. Abortion support hovered around 50% for the entirety of Roe, sometimes rising above that mark, sometimes below. But never did it become an 80-20 issue or even a 70-30 issue. Every year there were massive pro-life marches on the Capitol and in all 50 states. That sort of constant energy has never existed for overturning Obergefell, and recent polls suggest that 70% of Americans now support gay marriage. Now, I went to law school not to become a lawyer, but because I'm interested in following this sort of stuff. And let me say this, I think that the court refusing to hear a case because it is seen as settled law in the court of opinion is a bad excuse not to hear the case. Just because the public thinks something is settled does not mean that the Constitution supports it. But Chief Justice Roberts has a lot to say in what the court does, and his chief concern is the public perception of the court. He's known for, trying not to grant cert or for narrowing the scope of a case in order to sidestep negative headlines. He tried to do this with Dobbs. He wanted a 15-week abortion ban, then an entire abortion ban. It's not even an abortion ban, but he wanted to limit states to 15 weeks. And then he successfully did it a few years ago in a case involving the city of Philadelphia, where they tried to cut off Catholic adoption agencies that wouldn't place kids with same-sex couples. Rather than rule on religious freedom, which I believe the court should have done, Roberts framed it as a technical question about the way that the law was written. And he got what he wanted, a unanimous decision that sidestepped the main question and avoided any negative headlines. I discussed that case at length in my first ever video on the channel. I'll link to it below. But the bottom line is this. Roberts will not want to take up a case where Obergefell is a fringe topic, risking Obergefell being overturned, while the court is already under increased scrutiny because of recent controversial decisions. Now, just because I don't think that this case will overturn Obergefell does not mean that there won't be another case that comes up. Picture this. Oklahoma passes a law banning same-sex marriage, and they actually enforce it by refusing to issue marriage licenses to gay couples. A gay couple sues, wins in the lower courts, and Oklahoma appeals it all the way to the Supreme Court. In that scenario, same-sex marriage would be the central issue in the case, and it only takes 4 justices to grant cert, meaning the court hears the case. I think in a case where the central issue is gay marriage, you would have 4 justices sign on to hear it. No side issues, no chance for Roberts to sidestep the controversial issue, just gay marriage. If that happened today, I put the odds at about 60% that Obergefell gets overturned. Certain votes in the court are predictable. Alito and Thomas would absolutely vote to overturn. Kavanaugh likely leans that same way. On the other side, the liberal justices of Kagan, Jackson, and Sotomayor are locked to uphold Obergefell. Roberts, I think, if you were to ask him right now, likely leans toward their side simply because of his desire not to rock the boat too much. Although if it came down to it and the other conservative justices voted to overturn Obergefell, I could see him joining them because, after all, he did vote against it at the time. But, leaving all them aside, that leaves Barrett and Gorsuch, and they could go either way, in my opinion. And that's why Dobbs, the case that overturned Roe, can be informative. Barrett and Gorsuch signed on to the reasoning in Dobbs, and the same reasoning would apply here. It's all about something called substantive due process. Substantive due process is the idea that some rights not explicitly written into the Constitution are protected because they are so fundamental to who we are as a nation. It has been controversial for over a century at this point, starting with the Lochner case in the early 1900s. In Lochner, the court ruled that individuals have a constitutional freedom to contract. The court used that to strike down labor laws that states were trying to pass to eliminate child labor and improve factory conditions for workers. The Lochner case was later overturned and is now studied as one of the worst decisions in Supreme Court history. What's crazy about Lochner is not that it's seen as a terrible decision because of the legal basis behind the decision, but rather because of the effects that it had on the nation. Rather than looking back on Lochner and saying, oh, the court should not be inventing rights out of thin air, we look back on Lochner and say, oh, the court should not invent rights that have negative effects on people. And because of that flawed view of why Lochner was wrong, substantive due process has lived on and been the deciding factor of many cases. Some have been great, like Loving v. Virginia, which decided that states must allow interracial marriage, but others, like Roe v. Wade, were and still are widely contested and had no basis in the law outside of substantive due process. Which is why the court, in Dobbs, overturned Roe. In Dobbs, the court did not get rid of substantive due process entirely, likely because of cases like Loving v. Virginia, but instead examined past times that substantive due process has been used and come up with a very narrow rule. The court can find a substantive due process right when that right is deeply rooted in the history and tradition of America. Roe did not meet that test, as states had banned abortion from our country's founding up until Roe. And now I think you can probably see where this is going. Same-sex marriage was not recognized for most of American history. Under the history and tradition test of Dobbs, it fails. Maybe. It all depends on how the justices define marriage. There are some people, like Michael Knowles over at the Daily Wire, who argue that same-sex marriage does not exist. Not that it is not legally recognized, because it is, obviously, but that it does not exist because it does not fit the definition of marriage. According to him, and I'm going to read this off so that I know that it's right, marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman ordered toward the procreation and education of children, and secondarily for the mutual support of the spouses. Under that worldview, same-sex couples can never fulfill the definition of marriage because they can never be ordered toward the procreation of children. It's a definition rooted in natural law, not necessarily religion. But the natural law, many people believe, is what the legal law should uphold. The legal law should advance and push natural law because natural law is what's good, true, and observable in nature. It's just the way that things work. Men and women procreate, same-sex couples do not. But what about infertile couples? They can't procreate either, but that does not matter. They still can be ordered toward the procreation of children, even if they physically cannot have those children. It's like saying human beings have 2 arms and 2 legs. The kid born without an arm is an exception, but it does not change the fact that humans have 2 arms and 2 legs, or that that child is a human. So when a straight couple is infertile, it does not change the definition of marriage, or the fact that the couple are in a marriage. If Barrett or Gorsuch, or even Roberts, adopt this definition of marriage, then Obergefell is in trouble. But if 2 of those 3 take the broader view, that marriage is just a union between 2 people who love each other, then Obergefell would survive, because marriage itself is deeply rooted in history and tradition. For clarity's sake, the overturning of Obergefell on substantive due process grounds would not threaten Loving v. Virginia, the interracial marriage case, at all. Race is irrelevant to the definition of marriage. The definition is strictly focused on a male-female relationship. So interracial couples in a proper marriage would fit within the deeply rooted in history and tradition definition of substantive due process. So what happens if Obergefell is overturned, which I believe is likely to happen at some point, honestly? Well, this is where the Respect for Marriage Act comes in. Passed by Congress in 2022, this was their attempt to enshrine gay marriage into federal law. But did they do it? Only kind of. What it does is it forces states to recognize gay marriages entered into in another state. What it does not do is force states to hand out marriage licenses to gay couples. So in a post-Obergefell world, a same-sex couple in Oklahoma may have to drive to Colorado to get married, but Oklahoma would have to recognize that marriage when they come home. But Oklahoma would not be forced to give them a marriage license in their own courthouses. In other words, gay marriage would still be nationwide in some form. It would just be a bit more complicated for some people to get married. Now, where do I stand on this? I guess I would say I'm kind of on the fence. I was in high school at the time of Obergefell, 2015. That would have put me junior year. And since then, I've kind of grown up in a world where gay marriage is legal, and it's just how it is. But I do find myself leaning towards the Michael Knowles argument of the definition of marriage. Marriage, for all of human history until the past 5 minutes, has been between a man and a woman. Gay people could, do whatever, but they could not be in a marriage. Obergefell, if you adopt that view, did not necessarily create new law. It changed the definition of what marriage is. And a court should not be changing definitions. I understand the desire for gay marriage, especially if you're in a gay couple. You get some tax benefits, whatever. But I don't think the court should be extending the definition of marriage outside of what it has always meant. If states want to do that, fine. If Congress wants to do that, fine. Let the elected members who represent the people make those changes, not a judge. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, especially if you stuck around until the end. Keep me motivated to keep making these videos. I love doing it, and I love getting rewarded with your views. So until then, see you next time.